Okay, so what if we could grow a tiny, functioning brain in a lab to finally crack the code on conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder? It sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right? Well, it's actually happening. This is a huge breakthrough that could literally change millions of lives, and we're about to break down exactly how. So take a look at this. What you're seeing here is a brain organoid. Yeah, a tiny, lab-grown brain. And this little thing is at the very center of a massive discovery. For the first time ever, it's giving scientists a real window into what actually goes haywire in the brain with these disorders. So the big question is, how on earth does it work? All right, to really grasp why this is such a game changer, you've got to understand the massive problem that doctors have been up against for decades. I mean, when it comes to mental illness, how do you diagnose something you can't even see? Okay, think about it like this, right? If you break your arm, an X-ray shows you exactly where the break is. Simple. But for psychiatric conditions, there's just nothing like that. There isn't a blood test for bipolar disorder. There's no brain scan that screams schizophrenia. Diagnosis is all based on clinical judgment, on observation, and treatment. Well, treatment often becomes this long, frustrating guessing game. And, the lead researcher on this project, Annie Kithoria, she really hit the nail on the head. With a disease like Parkinson's, you can actually measure stuff, like dopamine levels. But with these disorders, there's just been nothing to point to. No clear physical sign that says, here's the problem. Well, that is until now. So what do you do when you can't see the problem inside a living patient's brain? The answer sounds crazy, but it's simple. You build a new one in a lab. And folks, this is where the story gets absolutely wild. The process itself is it's mind-blowing. First, they start with something really simple, like blood or skin cells, from patients and from healthy volunteers. Then, they basically work some biological magic, reprogramming those cells back into stem cells. And from there, they gently coax them to grow into these tiny, three-dimensional models of a brain. Now, to be totally clear, this isn't a complete, conscious, thinking brain in a dish. It's a simplified model. But honestly, that's exactly what makes it so incredibly powerful. It mimics the essential structure and function, giving scientists a window into how the brain develops and communicates. I mean, a window they've just never, ever had before. And get this, these little guys are only about the size of a pea, but they are so complex. They're modeled after the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that handles all the heavy lifting, the higher cognitive stuff. They have all the different kinds of brain cells you'd expect, and they even develop myelin. That's basically the insulation around the brain's wiring that helps signals fire super fast. Okay, so you've built a tiny brain in a dish. Awesome, but now what? How in the world do you figure out what's actually happening inside? Well, the solution was brilliant. They decided to essentially listen in on the neurons' conversations, using what you can think of as a tiny EEG. So picture this. They take each one of these living, pea-sized organoids, and they place it on a tiny microchip. And that chip is covered in this grid of electrodes, basically turning the whole setup into a high-tech listening device designed to eavesdrop on all that electrical chatter between the brain cells. Yeah, it works a lot like a normal EEG that you might see in a hospital, but here's the key difference. Instead of just getting a big picture of the whole brain's activity, this microgrid can zoom way in and listen to the specific, tiny little signals that individual neurons are firing back and forth. The level of precision is just incredible. So at this point, the researchers have all this data, just tons and tons of recordings from the healthy organoids, the schizophrenic organoids, and the bipolar organoids. And this is where we get to the big eureka moment. They had all this information, but now they had to figure out what it all actually meant. And here was the problem. To the human eye, the firing patterns were just a chaotic mess of data, a wall of noise, way too complex for a person to ever sort through. So, what did they do? They turned to AI. They trained a machine learning model to dive into all that chaos and hunt for a hidden signal, some kind of pattern that could tell the difference between a healthy organoid and one from a patient. And guess what? It worked. The AI, just by listening to the natural, spontaneous chatter of the neurons, could tell if the cells came from a healthy person or a patient with 83% accuracy. I mean, that's already incredible. But they didn't stop there. Then, they had this really clever idea. They thought, okay, instead of just passively listening, what if we poked the network a little bit to see how it reacts? So they gave the organoids a gentle electrical nudge just to see how the neurons would respond. And that, of course, gave them even more data to analyze. And with that little bit of extra data, the accuracy jumped to a staggering 92%. 92! This wasn't just a faint signal in the noise anymore. No way. This was a clear, undeniable fingerprint.
They had found it, an electrical signature, a unique, identifiable neural fingerprint for these conditions. This was it. This was the objective, measurable biomarker that the entire field of psychiatry had been searching for decades.
Okay, look, finding this biomarker is a massive scientific achievement, for sure. But what does it actually mean for patients, for real people living with these conditions? Well, this is where the story shifts from guesswork to precision medicine, and it could change absolutely everything. And this really gets to the human heart of it all, something Annie Cathuria summed up perfectly. The ultimate goal here is to finally put an end to that long, agonizing trial and error process of finding the right medication, a process that can take months or sometimes even years. I mean, just think about the possibilities. A doctor could take your cells, grow a mini model of your brain, and then test different drugs on it right there in the lab. They could find the perfect medication at the perfect dose specifically for you before you ever have to swallow a single pill. And for the 40% of schizophrenia patients who don't respond to the most common drug out there, this isn't just an improvement, this would be absolutely life-changing. So all of this leaves us with a really profound question, doesn't it? Are we standing on the edge of a new era, a future where psychiatric treatment begins not with a guess, but with a personalized test? A future where a brain in a dish could truly revolutionize how we understand and treat mental health? It's an absolutely incredible thing to think about.